Well, as somebody who grew up in retail, I think the quote that we just heard from Jason about reputation of the worst in the industry becomes the reputation of the industry. Can't be more true than it is today, right? So that was fantastic to reiterate that. My name is Nilda. First off, I want to give her apologies. She was not able to make it here. We were going to present together, but she is definitely here in spirit. And it's also an honor to be here because this has been very inspiring, I think, just to meet others in the industry and what's going on and the work that's doing. Makes you feel less alone, right? And that there's others trying to do the right thing and trying to push these agendas forward. So that is inspiring. So at PetSmart, we love pets. And this is evidence, if any of you have ever been to the PetSmart headquarters, you can't wear a black coat because you're going to be covered in dog fur. There's dogs everywhere, and cats, and snakes, and lizards, and gerbils, and things. I don't even know what they are. I have no idea. Our love of pets includes our recently introduced Buy a Bag, Give a Meal program that really helps focus on animals in need. And because of our love for pets, and we want to do what we can to ensure our products are produced ethically. We want to feel good about the products that we make, and we want them to be safe, functional, and dependable for our pet parents. We started this journey about 18 months ago, and this is not a bragging session. I'm just going to tell you that right now. This is not a pat on the back session. This is the reality check session of a program like this up and running for a big company and trying to push it through, and some of the obstacles and learnings that we faced along the way. So I have notes because Nilda was doing half of this, so I'm doing her part. So my professors are all staring at me right now. So PetSmart, 2 years ago, relied on an agent for all non-consumables production. We were public, went to private. We've created an office in Shanghai and Hong Kong to do sourcing. And we relied on others to really do the responsible sourcing for PetSmart. And as many of you know, that is not necessarily a sustainable practice. You guys are fantastic, but there's a lot of not as mature, fantastic organizations, retailers, brands out there. So we need to do it ourselves. Today, we're sourcing out of over 400 factories in 15 different countries. And this is impacting over 30,000 workers. And so the focus of what I'm going to be talking about is not so much on sustainability, but more on the social impact.
What percentage of your sales are the proprietary?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I'm relatively new to PetSmart, been there about a year. But I can tell you that number is growing. I'll say that. And it's a pretty high number. So one of the first things that we had to do at PetSmart is figure out what's in scope. What are we going to work on? What are we going to focus on? Are we talking about the working conditions in the factory? Are we talking about sustainability? Are we talking about both? Finding out where everything is made. So we're not just talking about the vendors that you pay, it's the factories in which it's being produced. To get that information, you have to talk to your suppliers. We have many suppliers in the room. There's a lot of suppliers that don't necessarily want to provide that information, but when you're producing proprietary branded product, it's the reality out there. Same thing at Target, Walmart, PetSmart, others. And then you need access. So that means going inside the factories, inside the farms, inside the plants. And again, there's always a lot of sometimes initial hesitation to that. It can be we have a unique process that only we do. We don't want PetSmart to steal it. Or it could be fear of what we're going to find. Then traceability. The old days of saying, well, I know where the finished product comes from, but I don't know really much else. Those days are gone, right? Thankfully, those days are gone. But those are also more challenging. If anyone's worked with conflict minerals or anything like that, cotton tracing. We know a lot of animal supply chains have been talked about here. This is very difficult stuff, and this is really going into areas that have not historically been looked at. And then you're looking only at finished products. Are you only going to go where your brand is on the product? Raw materials again, packaging suppliers. There's just a lot of different levels to look at, and you have to start somewhere and then say, what's our goal for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. So it's also figuring out what your brand is, right? What do you want to stand for? Do you want to be in the middle of the pack? Do you want to lead the pack? Do you want to lead the industry, your category? And then you have to be prepared to follow through on that. Do you want to collaborate with others? Do you want to be a lone wolf? So it's really figuring out how can an organization like this, how can you use this to come together to say, why am I fighting this battle on my own when we have the leverage of a lot more great minds in here and great organizations and umbrella organizations that can help us drive this forward. The days of working alone, that's done, right? What's going to be most important? Is it sustainable practices? Is it going to be looking at water usage, carbon footprints, ethical working conditions? What does ethical working conditions mean? Are we talking working hours? Are we talking hiring practices? Are we talking about repetitive motion and doing the same thing over and over again for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week? The impacts of the farm. And remembering, always keeping in mind that every country, every region, every product, while there are similarities, also always seem to have their own unique challenges. And then how do you manage all of that? And then engaging suppliers. And this one, there was, I think it was the company that did like the lip balm stuff, Badger. They talked about a supplier celebration day. And that is something I am not used to hearing. I'm used to hearing about a supplier engagement day or a supplier we tell you what to do day. But I've never heard a supplier celebration day. And I thought that is just a wonderful concept, right? Because without the supplier, the retailer is not going to survive. And the talking down to, that's 1985, right? It's got to be, how we're in this together, how do we figure it out? And so that whole idea of a supplier celebration in a think tank was beautiful to that. Because transparency is the expectation today, right? Telling the supplier, this is what our program is going to be, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're doing it. And then giving them the tools to succeed. So one of the things that we did right away at PetSmart when we rolled out this program is we said, okay, here's all the tests. Here's the materials. Here's the audit form. Here's the audit findings. Here's the audit manual that it goes through question by question, how the auditor is looking at payroll records and is looking at hiring practices and working hours. And there was some pushback to that because it's like, well, wait, if you're telling them what to do, is that preparing them to cheat, to cover up? There's a whole industry in the social compliance world of falsifying records, double books. That is a booming industry. There's a lot of money in it, and every former auditor that's been out in the world is now a consultant on how to cheat on auditing. So that's out there. You want to make money, go do that. But conversely, if you're trying to say, how do we try to do the right thing here? We can't eliminate all of that immediately, but why not give the people who are trying to do the right thing the right tools to do the right thing? I probably should have copyrighted it. Probably could have made a lot of money there too. So we've had some wins. The first thing that we have to remember is we're doing this because sometimes those workers don't have the same, not sometimes, many times those workers do not have the same voice that we have. And so it's really focused on their well-being. What are the impacts of that repetitive motion and doing the same thing all day. Feeling good about our products. You know, there's nothing happier than when you see a pet owner just going on and on about the product, whether it's Kong or something like that. And you want to feel good about how that product is made, right? Not sitting there thinking, yeah, I've been to that factory. That's not the right way to do business, and that's not even a sustainable practice, right? And also creating urgency around social responsibility. Everyone in this room, this is the choir, right? I don't need to preach this here. But not everyone, as we all know, especially in some of the bigger companies, are ready for this journey with the same sense of urgency that we are. I haven't met anyone who's like, I'm against sustainability, or I'm against paying workers the appropriate minimum wage in Vietnam. I haven't found any of that at any company. But you do find, I don't know if we're ready to start this yet. Let's wait a little bit before we get started or before we enforce this. And so it's really helping our leaders recognize why it's important to get started on this now and catch up with the rest of the industry, and also, again, doing the right thing. And then it also makes sure you become part of the conversation when our sourcing teams are talking to suppliers. The work that you're doing should be a selling point for a company like PetSmart, right? That should be the message that we're trying to get out there. Which all goes back to telling your story so others don't tell it. When you work for a big brand retailer, big box retailer, you have to get your message out there, because others are going to put their interpretation of your message out there if you don't. And so if you look at a lot of companies' websites, you see the bare minimum. And I'm not naming any names. You go to that website, you'll see a code of conduct out there. That's great. You'll see some additional requirements, maybe for the California Transparency Act, things like that. But you don't see a lot of detail of, hey, this is what we're doing. There's nothing that's really inspiring. Now, we can learn from others in other parts of our organization on how to do that better, thinking only natural pet. So we can take advantage of that and leverage that, because we should be telling our story. We've heard some fantastic stories here the last few days, right? And I think keep asking, how do you tell that story? How do others know what you're going to do? I think you've asked that almost every time. And I think that's a very important point, is that we can all tell each other what we're doing, but we should be leading for the industry as well, right? So that's not just our consumers or pet parents know what we're doing, but students that are researching companies, doing their papers on social responsibility. Let's just tell that story a little bit better. And then the reality is that's also managing risk, right? So also recognize the work done by our suppliers. So how can we leverage the wins that you've had to tell our story as well, working with the right partners? Challenges, trying to execute consistently. Do you have exceptions? Realities of production. A small bird toy factory is very different than a towel factory for Target. I'm just going to tell you that right now. By about 12,000 people. Degrees of noncompliance. What does really bad mean versus just bad? And how do you get that alignment within the company? Do you fix or do you exit suppliers? Do you work for the long term, or do you say, I'm not getting anywhere, it's time to go? Cut and run is what it's called in the apparel industry. But you got to remember, the workers benefit from the education. You cut and run, that worker working in that factory who didn't have a voice before, certainly is not going to have a voice now. And then keeping your influencers engaged, reminding your leadership why you're doing this, some of the successes you've had, some of the learnings from events like this. And just also reminding your team members, this is everyone's responsibility. This is not just my responsibility or my team's responsibility. It's all of ours. What we've learned, the flexibility, reality versus preconceived notions. Just because it's a family-run organization doesn't mean it's going to be a perfectly run family organization. A policy that is always waived or ignored is not a policy. And then learning from experience and educating others from your experience. Bringing along your partners, whether that's suppliers or people internal. Making people feel involved in this. People want to feel good about the work that we're doing, so how can you make them feel like they're a part of this movement? And allowing your partners and trusting them, because they can be your eyes and ears sometimes, and they can have different sight lines. They can be maybe more knowledgeable of the industry, or they are more knowledgeable of the specific products and categories. Leverage that. Ask them the right questions. And then keep moving forward. There's just no resting and saying, okay, we've accomplished what we've wanted to. New risks are coming through all the time. If anybody remembers Bangladesh a few years back, you know what I'm talking about. And then now that you have this information, we've been doing this about a year at PetSmart, we got to take this information and use it and work with it. Take action. And then leverage groups like the PSC and all the people that I've met in this room. And then really saying, okay, we got to do more. We got to do more in the environmental sphere. We got to do more in raw material production and stuff like that. And it's really pushing that envelope forward to make an impact, because really that's what everyone is expecting us to do. Okay? Okay, no questions? Thank you. That's awesome. Yes?
You said you work with 400 factories, and then you kind of asked a number of questions. Do you have some sort of a checklist when you go around to those factories that you ask them those questions? Part number one. Part number two, transparency. Would you be willing to put those questions, maybe not the answers per factory, because that'd be a little touchy, but put those questions up on your website and hold brands up to those same standards?
So the first part of the question was, does PetSmart have like an audit form? Absolutely. Because as much as you want everybody just blast the audit tool as a checklist, there's still a need for driving consistency and making sure that the person in Vietnam is looking at the same stuff as the person in China, Canada, wherever. So there's still a need for checklists, so absolutely. And that is got to be the backbone. As old-fashioned as it is, there's got to be a drive for consistency, and including the findings behind that and how and what they should be looking for when they ask the questions. The second part is the more difficult part that I'd like to just say, next question. But your question was on transparency and saying, should PetSmart have that form on its website? Or should many companies put a factory list on their website, or at least the consolidated results of that? It took us, at my previous employer, a long time to get there. PetSmart, we're not ready to do that yet, because honestly, we're still developing that form. The form we created a year ago, we've now learned from that and said, okay, we need to focus more on these areas, maybe a little bit less on that. But the goal is transparency. Yeah.
So going back to the previous speaker, so you would say this is a competitive edge for you, that list. Because if it's pre-competitive, you could do it together with PetSmart and all the others and make that list.
So I've been involved with trying to come up with a standard audit form for a really long time. And I'd say the closest that we got was with the Apparel Coalition. And the problem with the standardized audit form, I shouldn't say the problem, the challenge that we've had at PetSmart, at my previous employer, and talking with others in the industry, is there's a lot of entrenchment out there of what a company's values are. And there's a lot of companies that have been auditing for a really long time, and they have developed what they see as important. And so how do I get my importance into that generic audit form that also covers Petco's importance, or Walmart's importance or Target's and all of that. That has been a significant challenge. And maybe we'll get there. Sustainability, honestly, a little bit newer. And a lot of companies didn't have things in place, at least as far as supplier sustainability. So it was much easier to come together. That's truthfully how I look at it. But that being said, with PetSmart still being relatively new in this field, we may have that opportunity to do that. How can we collaborate? What are some of these other organizations that are out there that are doing it? But honestly, we're going into a lot of factories that have never been audited before. No one has ever been there. They're looking at me or our audit team, and they're like, what on earth are you looking at? But what's nice is that, and we were talking about this yesterday, is the amount of corruption is a lot less because they don't know necessarily what we want. So there's not the 8 sets of books out there, the Target, Walmart, PetSmart, Amazon, all of that. They're like, yeah, here's our books. Here's what we're working. Here's what we're paying. They're also much smaller factories. So we're actually able to impact change a lot faster at PetSmart than maybe historically I was able to do. I danced around your question. Yes.
Right here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I may have missed it, but it feels like what you're talking about is very broad. I guess, what are you really going after with this audit? Is it social responsibility? Is there sustainability? What are the consequences if they're not meeting those? Like, what is it really addressing?
Yes, it was intended to be broad, I'll tell you that. So what we are focused on is some of the basic tenets of working hours, minimum wage, hiring practices, and health and safety in the factory, okay? So health and safety can be as basic as fire extinguishers, emergency exits, things that we kind of take for granted here. What we have found is that these are not, many of these factories, and I'm not talking about a big food factory, I'm talking about like a bird toy factory or a cat toy factory. These are not the most sophisticated factories out there. And so even things like emergency exits or any emergency lighting is a new concept to that factory because no one has ever asked them or looked at that before. So we're dealing with the basics here. We've got to cover some of these basics. And we're going as fast as we can, but we've got to get these core tenets down before we start asking them, okay, I want to see your recycling reports, or your water usage reports. Right now, there's factories that don't even have running water in them. So it's just a nuanced difference to some of these factories. Yeah.
Dan, you mentioned starting with your private label brands. And I can see why that makes sense for the biggest impact. Have you put any challenges out to the brand side? I think, just speaking from Tom's perspective, I think we would be challenged and willing to collaborate together on something like that.
Yes, so we want to, but we also need to be somewhat pragmatic and be like, we need to have our house in order before we start kind of pointing fingers at others, right? And so I think that's going to be maybe 3 years from now, and we can start saying, okay, what can we do together? Or your company, what should I say it? What are we doing? What are you doing? Help us understand what you're doing so that we're more educated on your process, what we can learn from you. But again, right now, it's what we're focused on is just getting our arms around all these different product types. And it's not insurmountable, but there's enough, and the volume runs are much smaller, right? So we don't necessarily have that factory that's producing year-round cat toys. They might be producing for 6 months for us. And so even though we're a big player in the pet industry, that factory might make pet toys, but it might also make baby toys. And the baby toys is what they're focused on in those suppliers. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
My question's a little bit direct.
Great.
I recently worked with a company that asked me for social audit. And I'd like to ask what type of other collaborations you've had with other companies. I can name one, which is Omega, which is called Omega, that I had to deal with. The the client asked me specifically to pay for the audit. I was very happy to do it. So to your responsibility with some of your clients, I mean, have you used Omega? Are there collaborations? Who have you used? Is there some names that you can share with us?
So, good question. Direct and difficult, because I'm kind of internally conflicted in some ways, because I'm definitely not here to recommend third-party suppliers. That's an industry upon itself, a many million-dollar industry. But there are some good ones out there. I think reputation is a big part of it. If I'm cornered into saying who would I recommend, I'd be like, okay, first off, when you go to a website and you look at it, who are the big players out there? Who actually have something to stand for? And that's kind of the direction. Now, right now, today, PetSmart works with BV. Now, I'm not endorsing BV, and I'm not against BV. They're providing a service to us, and that's what we need them for right now. But you've got your SGS, your BV, your Intertex, Omega. You've got those bigger players. It's the really small ones that I get nervous about, small and local ones. Those are the ones where I'm a little bit more suspect of what they're actually trying to achieve. Did that even remotely answer your question?
Are there other companies outside of PetSmart that you collaborate with? Obviously, we're all here to make a change.
So at PetSmart, no, because we've only been doing this for about a year. At my previous employer, we worked with the Verite, we worked with some other category-specific organizations. Some probably not as much as they would have wanted us to, but I don't have anybody right now that I'm just throwing out other than an organization like PSC. Oh, it's not an auditing company. But ask me that question next year at this event, and I'll have a better answer. I believe you, actually. I believe she will.
All right. Sorry. Just in order for us to keep on track, I am going to have to call the questions to a close. Sorry for all you guys having burning questions. But you can catch up with Daniel for the rest of the day. He'll be here. And thank you for having the courage to show us what you're working on. All right, I think it's hard to have all the answers at such infancy working on something. So I've been working with Daniel since he really launched it to kind of bounce ideas off of, and places that I don't have information and he doesn't have information, and how can we work together to see how we can kind of close the gaps for both of us. So I've appreciated getting to know him, and I hope you did as well.